Last month I published a video about a few things which media tends to get wrong about pirates, and it's not exactly a new idea to make videos about this sort of topic. People have made it before me. On the other hand, I haven't seen anyone cover the opposite, that is, the things which media get right. Most of the video will concern the few widespread conceptions about pirates which turns out to be correct, but most of the individual movies, books or games tend to get one or two things right, which only they do. I've got some examples from a few selected works. One of the most influential figures in shaping our image of the pirate was a painter named Howard Pyle. He was active in the late 19th century and produced a multitude of works, many of which you've probably seen. I tend to feature them in my videos. This one is probably the most famous, depicting a buccaneer. Aside from the sandals, the earring, and the gold bracelet, this is pretty close to what many pirates would have looked like. This one features William Kidd burying his treasure. He wears a kerchief and a hat, a style very common with Caribbean gentlemen. Then he's got a sash, socks, and shoes. No boots. The crew are seen just wearing shirts, hats, pants, and go barefoot. Aside from the color black being overused, and the sashes, which weren't very English, it seems quite close. This painting, depicting Captain Thomas Tew, is probably the most accurate. Aside from the earring, there's really nothing to comment on. Treasure Island is likely the most influential piece of pirate media, and actually quite historically accurate. The mutiny, the behavior of the pirates, and the buried treasure is inspired by history, though the latter was exaggerated. Some people have asked me if the black spot is a real thing. No, it wasn't. Stevenson invented it for the novel. Another influential book is Captain Blood. It's even more inspired by history than Treasure Island, though quite romanticized. What Blood and Treasure Island have in common is that they took some bits of history and exaggerated them, and then people took said exaggerations as part of pirate culture. Which is why we have treasure maps, pirates bombarding cities, and one-on-one duels. The duel in Captain Blood may very well have been inspired by one of Howard Pyle's paintings, but also one of the few documented cases in which two buccaneer captains dueled for command of their fleet, Laurens de Graaf and Nicolas van Hoorn. But the duel lasted like a second. It was over with the single stroke of a sword. Pirates of the Caribbean is largely a love letter to those old pirate movies inspired by Treasure Island and Captain Blood. And though it is a fantasy series, it draws heavily from real history, from more obvious things like featuring historical nations and factions, down to some smaller details which others have missed. Jack Sparrow is branded with a P for pirate, which the East India Company actually did, and he also has a syphilis scar, something very common at the time, no doubt among pirates especially. After the end of the POTC trilogy, there was a revived interest in grittier and more quote-unquote realistic pirates. Assassin's Creed 4 took place in a historical setting, but there's not much real history in it, a lot of anachronisms, and it's basically as much a fantasy as the POTC franchise. I found the dialogue to be very authentic, however, and it's clear that they at least had a period dictionary on hand. The TV series Black Sails is the most notable attempt at portraying authentic pirates, but it's a mixed bag of hitting the mark and missing completely. One of the standout things it got right was the power structure of a pirate ship. Instead of the captain having supreme authority, the captains in Black Sails constantly have their power checked by the quartermaster, who also handles matters of plunder and commerce. I think it was actually through Black Sails that I personally learned of this dynamic. I only started researching pirates seriously around 2019. Aside from these individual examples of unique things which the selected works get right, there are a few facts which we deem intrinsical to pirates, which actually turn out to be historical. One of them is the pirate accent. First popularized by Robert Newton through his portrayal of Long John Silver and Blackbeard. It is actually an English West Country accent, spoken mostly around Cornwall and the city of Bristol. In Treasure Island, Long John was operating out of Bristol, and some evidence points to Blackbeard being Bristol-born. Newton also popularized the R, which is part of the West Country accent, but used to indicate yes or as part of a word. For example, "Are we going to John Starr's? R." John Starr owned the biggest whorehouse in Port Royal. The West Country was very active in the maritime scene. Bristol was one of England's most prominent ports, and the city was a major player in the slave trade. So too was it a hub for privateers, like Woodes Rogers. Henry Avery was born in Devonshire, and William Dampier in Somerset. Whilst Avery was a right crook, certainly befitting the pirate accent, It's funny to have the soft-spoken Dampier, a man more interested in birds and coconuts, to speak in the same fashion. Sailors and pirates by proxy spoke in a manner different from landlubbers. Naturally, they cussed a lot more, pirates especially, but they also intermingled nautical speak with their everyday talk. A prime example of how ingrained this was in the popular conception comes from Fanny Hill, an erotic novella published in 1748. Don't ask me why I'm reading 18th century erotica. Yeah, it's purely for research. There is a scene in which she hooks up with a sailor, and when they're about to do it, she notes how, quote, "it was not going by the right door, and knocking desperately at the wrong one." When she informs the sailor of this, he merely responds, "My dear, any port in a storm." What about some common pirate phrases? Davy Jones' Locker. It appears every now and then in period documents. So yeah, accurate. Me hearties or me hearty. They'd say my hearts or my heart, without the Y. Shiver my timbers. This seems to be a 19th century phrase, but pirates often use the word belly timber as a synonym for food. Scurvy dog. Scurvy was definitely used in this context. You could say that someone was pulling a scurvy trick on you. Dog was also an incredibly common insult. Pirate media puts a bigger emphasis on drink rather than food, and whilst pirates love to eat, they drank copious amounts of rum indeed. Some have suggested that the association between pirates and rum stems from the 19th century, but it is considerably older. Rum was distilled from molasses, a byproduct of the sugar production in the Caribbean. So for those rogues operating out of those islands, the drink was cheap and freely available. By the 1670s, Jamaica sloopmen sold it to the Baven in Yucatan, and by the 90s, smugglers shipped it across the world to the pirates of Madagascar. Of course they drank other spirits: beer, arrack, cider, brandy, and wine. Some of these spirits they may have wished to share with a close companion. We hardly ever see a pirate unaccompanied by the pet parrot on his shoulder. Cutthroat Island from '95 sees Captain Morgan Adams accompanied by a monkey, much like Barbossa in the POTC franchise. Both parrots and monkeys were popular pets with sailors and pirates. A parrot could be purchased for $5, same as a good musket, and then the parrot could be sold in a more northern climate at a higher price, or kept as a pet and taught to talk. Dampier noting how they would prate very prettily. Monkeys, often called jackanapes, could likewise be found accompanying pirates and sailors, as we oft have illustrated from the period. On the African coast you could buy 4 of them for an old hat, and they were a common trade item bought by slave traders. Other monkeys were encountered in the New World, and flinging their feces at unfortunate passerbys. Pirates had other pets as well. Dogs were quite common, and the buccaneers kept bloodhounds for hunting. These dogs had been used by the Spanish in the previous century to hunt and kill the native inhabitants. Then there were cats for catching the countless rats found aboard, and even livestock: goats, sheep, cows, pigs, chicken. The ship would fill up with trash that needed throwing overboard, luring another type of beast to follow in their wake. Be careful not to fall overboard. You're liable to lose a leg. Long John Silver is the first major pirate in fiction to be seen without a leg, hobbling along on a pair of crutches. Captain Hook lost his hand to a crocodile, earning his namesake prosthetic. Eye patches are often added to make the pirate look scary. The image of crippled sailors stemmed from the early 19th century and the sheer amount of pensioned veterans of the Napoleonic Wars. But missing body parts was nothing new in the age of sail, and in a walk of life as dangerous as a pirate's, they expected it. Compensation was offered to anyone injured, and there's even an account of pirates offering compensation for someone losing their wooden prosthetics, though this may have been a joke. Walking around a ship with any such injury would have been difficult, so most pirates were glad to take their compensation and retire in peace. They'd likely have some trauma to tackle as well. A few of them might have pressed on anyway, and we do have a few descriptions of maimed pirates active in service. Cornelis Jola was a Dutch pirate, active in the 1630s. He was nicknamed Wooden Leg. Christopher Condent, another pirate from the West Country, was also called Billy One Hand. One of his associates was the one-eyed Frenchman, Olivier Levasseur, though there's never any description of an eye patch. Neither is there any historical documentation of pirates wearing eye patches to enhance their night vision, and this technique was detrimental and, completely unnecessary aboard a ship anyway. There's a lot of people on the internet pushing this narrative, so if you need more information to believe me, I made a separate video discussing this topic in length. Another topic which I came up with after writing this script is how we associate pirates with the tropics. Palm trees, golden beaches, and a cyan-colored sea revealing like a window the vast coral reefs and ancient shipwrecks lost to time. I remember one historian discussing how pirates likely wouldn't have been so popular if it hadn't been for the tropics. It's colorful, exotic, mysterious, adventurous. And it's true. Pirates in the Golden Age operated primarily out of the Caribbean, a tropical zone. But the scenery was not always as we expect. The Caribbean isn't only palm trees, but a lot of pine also. New Providence, for example, has a significant pine field. Pine trees are seen both in Treasure Island and Black Sails. But it wasn't only the Caribbean. They visited other tropical areas like Mexico, South America, West Africa, and Madagascar. Not all climates here are jungle or savanna. Pirates saw the deserts of Peru and Arabia. They also went outside of the tropics, northern states like Pennsylvania, or even the far south of Argentina, sailing through ice and snowstorms. Huge thanks to my generous channel members and Patreon supporters. In particular, Cole Freer, Max Dweck, 1660, Michaela Jans, Daniel Stryker, Sea Dog, Randall DeVere, Old Man Zed, Krillov, Nick Hooper, and Captain Jake Rumdrinker. If you'd like to hang out with fellow pirate enthusiasts, please check out the link to our Discord server in the video description. Hope to see you there. Cheers!